basis because we are in a, so that's back to you, Arizona.
All right. Next, we move to the approval of minutes from our last Zoom meeting on June 11th. Were there any changes that needed to be made? Stephanie, did you receive any?
Yes. So I got one edit from Vice Chair Wetton. It was just a correction on a name, and I resent the revised packet earlier today, and the website was also updated.
Okay, excellent. Anyone else have other changes that need to be made? Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
Second.
Okay. Do we need to vote? I forget if we need to vote on this or just, we do. Okay.
Commissioner Bush,
Aye.
Oh, that's right.
Commissioner Launder,
Aye.
Commissioner Martos,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wetton,
Aye.
Chair Israelit.
Aye. I forgot about the new Zoom. The Zoom voting has to go through Stephanie. Thank you. Okay, next we will move to public comments on non-agenda items. Is there anything for us to discuss or to read or hear from anyone?
I don't have any hands raised.
And no emails were received.
Let me just double check. Nothing to the public comment email.
Okay, great. Well, then we'll move on to the discussion action items. Normally we would have the community BPAC update with Ms. Beatty. I don't know if anyone is present here from the BPAC committee tonight.
They
Okay.
may still be meeting. I left the meeting early, or not early, but in time to come to this. So they were still meeting.
Okay. All right. And I think the last time Chair Ms. Beatty had said that they were going to be working on the master plan moving forward for the most part. So then let's go ahead then and move on to item 6B, which is the Chapin Avenue feasibility study update. Mr. Huang?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Israelit. For tonight's meeting, Ms. Jennifer Lee, our environmental regulatory compliance coordinator, will be making the presentation. But before we get started, I wanted to, if you look through the slides, one of the other commissioners did have a question about how to look at them. And here we have an aerial that's on the bottom right-hand corner of most of those slides. On the left hand is El Camino Real. Chapin is along here, and then Primrose. And there are the businesses that kind of give you an idea. This green bar will move across Chapin. And roughly what happens is the first slide under an option is this cross section. The next one is here. And then the third one is here. And I believe the second one and then is repeated. So when you move across there, that's the way you're looking at your slides. Usually 1, 2, 3. And then if you continue on, it would probably be slide 2. But just to kind of give you an idea, when we talk about it, we're moving from left to right, El Camino moving west to east. So with that, I will try to turn it back to Miss Lee, and let me share her screen. I'm gonna, oh, I believe she has the ability. Do you have the ability, Jen?
Let's see.
If not, I'll have to be your.
Shall I click on the share screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rather.
Says host disabled. Would you mind sharing your screen? And then I'll just say next slide.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and.
All right. Well, while Andy gets that set up for us. Good evening, commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to give you an update on this feasibility study that I'm running. Since this is my first time in front of you all, I'd just like to take a couple minutes just to give a quick introduction of myself. Again, my name is Jennifer Lee. I work in Public Works with Andy, and my role is in environmental regulatory compliance, which is a mouthful, which is basically what my role for the city is to make sure that we are in compliance with state environmental laws with regards to stormwater. But I also do some work with laws for water as well and water conservation. And so tonight's presentation is to give you an update on this, and also described in the staff report. This really kind of stems from my role working in stormwater regulatory compliance. And as we see that there's a nexus with stormwater treatment as well as transportation. And so with those synergies in mind, I was looking at opportunities of how we could meet our stormwater regulations, as well as look at existing opportunities that could benefit not just from stormwater treatment, but also from pedestrian, bicycle, visibility and enhancements. And so tonight I'll just go through with a progress of what our consultants have created to date. And the goal is to get your initial feedback and thoughts on, what priorities you think, we should be considering as we go through this. And just to note, we will be doing an extensive public outreach. So this won't be the only time that the member of the public would be seeing this. We do intend to do meetings, although probably not in person as we would have liked. But we will be, going through, showing this, getting input from the businesses, the residents, and so forth. And so with that, I'll start. Oh, and also if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt, but I'll also pause after each option for that as well. Great. And so next slide, please. Great. So as I mentioned, the goal is to get feedback from you all on these options and understand what the priorities are. Next slide, please. So this starts with our first option. And so looking at the bottom right of your screen, we're looking at the segment towards El Camino Real. And so this cross-section shows reverse angled parking on both sides of the street. We see that there's a 10 feet center turning lane and a loading zone. And the drive aisle has been reduced to 12 feet with a class 3 Share bike lane. Next slide. And now this cross section is looking on the opposite side towards Primrose Road. And so you see that we still have, we've switched to parallel parking on both sides as opposed to reverse angle. The median, instead of a turning lane, has now been converted to a reverse angled parking with a 7 feet planter that also acts as a way for, as people are parking on the right side of the street, they can get out and go into that little mini refuge area. And then we also have the continuance of the class 3 Share bike lane. Next. And now this third cross section is just looking at a potential mid-block pedestrian crossing. From our outreach, we've heard lots of comments about people saying that it's pretty difficult to cross the street because, we don't really expect people either to walk all the way down to El Camino or all the way down to Primrose just to get to the other side. And so what ends up happening is that there's a lot of jaywalking. And so because we know that that behavior is going to continue, we are looking for ways to make it more safer for pedestrians. And so we're proposing to put a mid-block pedestrian crossing, which includes these bulb outs you'll see on both sides that has bioretention plantings. And so those are essentially special landscaping that helps capture and treat some of that stormwater runoff as it's coming down from El Camino. holds it, retains it, lets it naturally absorb into the ground, and then goes back into the storm drain system as cleaner water. And so this is kind of that nexus that I was talking about with stormwater infrastructure as well as transportation. And an example of a bulb out, if you're wondering what that might look like, well, we already have examples of that on Burlingame Avenue, the streetscape project, those curb extensions. Some of those actually do capture and treat stormwater, and some of those are actually just landscaping. And also as the California Drive Roundabout project also has some of those bulb outs with curb cuts that, you know, are able to capture and treat any runoff from the street. And next slide.
One question on that slide.
Oh, sure.
So I understand that's the intersection of Primrose and Chapin. How far would this island go down into Chapin?
Yeah, so that has yet to be determined yet. These are still kind of in the early phases of the plan. So we haven't really brought it out to the public and asked them, you know, how long or how wide do we envision this? We do intend to have a mid-block crossing, but we just don't know to what length that would be yet. Yeah. Did I answer? Sorry, that didn't really answer your question.
Got it. But this is on Chapin, not on Primrose, correct?
Yes, this specific one is. There will be another example that shows a crossing, a mid-block crossing, as well as the T intersection at Primrose. But for now, this one is just being proposed at the mid-block.
Okay. Oh, this is mid-block, not at Primrose. Okay.
Yes. All right. Any other questions? All right. Hearing none. And so these next few images just show examples of what a shared, a class 3 shared bike lane would look like as well. Next slide. A reverse angled parking, and which I would note is actually safer for bicyclists, because of when you're in a car and you're pulling out, you'll be able to look at, well, it's better visibility for bicyclists as they come by, as opposed to a traditional angle parking, whereas they back up, it makes it more difficult for the driver to spot bicyclists going through. And a picture of a parking along the median. And next slide.
I just had a question, if I could, on the reverse angle parking.
Sure.
So pulling into it, the car has to back up, which to me would seem difficult in a couple of respects. One is that if there's a car behind you, all of a sudden you're backing up, and the person following behind you, is then put at some sort of a risk of you backing up. Plus, if there's a bike coming, you have the same sort of problem, I would think, of the bicyclist coming and you're backing up into it. So I'm not, I don't necessarily see the advantage of reverse angle. I understand regular angle, pulling out is dangerous in that respect, but I'm not sure I understand how this is any better. So.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your comment. Okay. Sorry, I'm typing right now. Take notes on that. Okay.
Through the chair. To answer part of that question, I think the thought behind is if there's a bike on the roadway, you've passed them, so you're aware. So you wouldn't back in until that bicyclist has passed where you're trying to park. So you've seen it, whereas backing out, you can only see that window that you're backing out into. So you don't see it, and your peripheral vision is kind of cut off. So that's a thought. You've at least, if you're paying attention, you've seen this cyclists, and then you'll make your decision, you wait, and then back in. So that's for that part of it. But.
Okay, and it works elsewhere, I assume, because you have pictures of it.
Yes, this is also used in San Francisco that I've seen personally in front of their city hall, I think. And so with that, we'll move on to the next slide. So this one, so just to, in interest of time, I'm not going to read through every single bullet, but I'd just like to kind of just summarize that this slide. So each of these options will have a slide like this. And it basically summarizes how this option is different relative to the other two options we'll be looking at tonight. And so for this option A, at a glance, we see that it's better for pedestrians, as well as it has improvements for landscaping. For cars, it does propose a 1 to 10% parking decrease, which is, better than the other two options, I guess, in terms of, motorists. And for cyclists, it's, there's some give and take with these options. And so this one has the lowest level of bicycle infrastructure. And so as we go through these options, I want you to keep in mind, should we focus more on having improvements for the motorists, for the bicyclists, for pedestrians? There's going to be some give and take as we go through these options, even though we do have 98 feet right of way. In the ideal world, we would do everything, but we just don't live in that fantasy world. And so we're looking to you all for some guidance. And then when we do public outreach, we'll also do some more, solicit more input and feedback from the public on, what priorities matter. And so moving on to
before you move on through the chair, Ms. Lee.
Yes.
So it would be extremely helpful to have a bird's eye view of how all this goes together. Okay. You stopped at mid-block, and Mr. Wong's description said that I believe slide 2 would follow mid-block, which narrows it back down to, I'm looking through the slides, to that median, the 7-foot walkway as you get closer to Primrose. Is that correct?
And
then I believe what, I'm sorry, through the chair, I believe what Commissioner Martos is asking is what happens on the end closer to Primrose.
Primrose.
And, and that's where we jump back up and potentially we have a little bit more parking by this scenario coming up, which is the reverse, I'm sorry. Yeah, the reverse angled with some parallel parking along the median strip rather than this where we have a two-way left turn lane. But again, as Ms. Lee pointed out, some of this is, we're just kind of getting, we don't know the length of how long some of these or how much of this we're going to put in. We're just trying to get the community's feedback of what they would like here. And again, at the intersection of Primrose and Chapin, that's also yet to be determined, as you can see in these slides. We're not showing a turn lane. There's other options, but we wanted to at least get the ball rolling. So sorry.
So does that slide 2 that shows that 7-foot walk median, does that extend all the way to Primrose, or is there something else at Primrose? It terminates at Primrose.
Sorry, and at Primrose, it will change because right now we have turn lanes. And so again, this isn't going up all the way to Primrose. That's still yet to be determined because we have to see what the desire is, because obviously we can't run this all the way up there. And be able to open up, we'd have to look at the queuing then at that point, because right now we have those 3 lanes or 2 lanes that break out. One turns right to go southbound on Primrose and the other turns north to go towards the library. So
then do I understand this is an 80% design where you have 4 of these streetscapes put together, but the last streetscape or the last 20% at Primrose is yet to be determined? Is that correct?
Correct, but these are conceptuals. These aren't designs yet. This is.
Oh, okay, sorry, whatever.
We have no design plans yet.
No, I got it. They're conceptual, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. But again, that last piece that connects Chapin to Primrose has not been decided. Is that right? You don't have a design for that in any of these, is the way I understand it.
That is
or
correct.
A concept for that piece of Chapin in any of these options. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Just so I can get my bearing. And again, bird's eye view of how all these pieces go together would be tremendously helpful.
We'll take
an
note of
FYI. Okay.
again,
Yep.
for part of tonight's presentation is also to maybe make some tweaks of it before we go and have the community meeting. So you guys are kind of the guinea pigs for that. So thank you.
Before we move on, I just wanted to also, I'm having a little trouble with discrepancy perhaps, but you had said that with this plan, there's a reduction up to 10% of parking space. However, currently there's angled parking on 2 sides of the road. And now we're talking about having parallel parking all up and down the road, plus angled parking in some of the median strip and parallel parking on the other side of that median strip. So it would seem to me that we're actually gaining parking spaces, even though we're switching some of it from angle to parallel.
Yeah, so you're referring to option A. So yeah, so that option does show reverse angle towards the El Camino side and then parallel parking towards the Primrose side. And so just from preliminary estimates, our consultants have said that it looks like it's a 1 to 10% parking decrease, but those numbers have yet to be concrete because we don't know what that intersection at Primrose would look like for sure yet. And so this is kind of more of like a guesstimate of what we might see with these options, which, parking, if you all give me the direction that parking is pertinent and we shouldn't lose one single space, then we can kind of finagle it and make it work. But just as these options as they are, does show that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. It still doesn't totally make sense to me because we're gaining another aisle of parking, at least for part of the length of the road. So I think we just need to make sure that's double check on that.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? All right, hearing none. So resuming back to option B. So this is our complete streets option. And so with this option, we see that there's parallel parking on both sides and a class 4 protected bike lane with a planted landscaping buffer between the parking and the bike lane. And so this is looking towards El Camino. We have that 10 feet turning lane as we did in option A with a loading zone. And next slide. And now with looking at the area towards Primrose, we, instead of that 10-foot turning or loading zone, we have a planted median. And that's essentially the only difference between looking at the western and the eastern part of that street. And this is the cross-section looking at the mid-block pedestrian crossing. Again, with this one, similar to option A, we have the bulb outs that have the bioretention plantings, a pedestrian refuge island, and yeah, that's all I can say for this one. And here's an example of what a separated bike lane looks like on Polk Street in San Francisco. This is right across the street from their City Hall. Next slide. And here's a summary of how this option relates to the other two options. So this one is our bike-friendly option compared to option A. It eliminates a lot of parking. It's estimated 49 to 55%, and we'll get the exact numbers, as we flesh these out. And there are good opportunities for landscaping in this option as well. Any questions for option B before I move on? All right.
So sorry, through the chair. So I have a question about all three designs actually, but and it's all the same question. So mid-block, after the end sections of Chapin where there are left turn lanes. So mid-block and just preceding mid-block where there's that median, is there any way to make a left turn?
I will have to ask my consultants about that. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Apologize.
Okay, because it seems like the only way to make a left turn is at the ends of Chapin by this conceptual sketches. Is that correct, Mr. Wong?
That's correct. But as I tried to point out also, those ends haven't been determined. We may take that first slide you saw that not necessarily a two-way left turn lane, but a turn lane at that location, and that might be down at Chapin. This is more for, away from the intersections, but that, because at the intersection it changes, because especially at El Camino, that's going to be something different there as well, because Caltrans has that set up as with a left turn lane there as well. So those ends have yet to be determined, and that's the reason. There's a little bit more coordination, but this gives us the run of 80% of Chapin, not the 10% on each end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. But my point was that once that median starts, there's no opportunity to make a left-hand turn until it ends.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if you're coming out.
So there's no breaks in the middle where there's going to be a left turn lane or anything like that. If you want to turn left, say into the bank, what bank is over there? There's a bank over there. Chase or whatever it is, mid-block, right? You can't do it if you're going east on Chapin. You got to go to the end of the street, make a U-turn or something like that. Is that right?
Well, that is correct, and part of how we described it, but you can take that first section and then move it. I think, and
right.
We've got the consultant on, but you can have a two-way left turn lane mid-block, but then the trade-off there is obviously you're going to lose parking, and that maybe is where the parking number.
Right.
And Chair Israel pointed out that it would seem like an increase, but if you introduce more of those two-way left turn lanes, you're going to lose that part.
No, I understood, and none of these three options have that left turn lane mid-block. It's once that median starts, you can't turn left until it ends.
And it could end within the mid-block area, so you could have that, but that's yet to be determined. Again, we have the businesses who have, when we had the outreach, they stressed they wanted to maintain, if not increase parking. And then we've got groups that also, they want to improve the facility on here. So it's kind of, we've got to find that balance, the tipping point of what is acceptable for the community and as a whole.
I understand. Yeah, but in these three options, that's the way it is. So unless we have an option D, we've got no left turn lane with these three options once that median starts.
And I guess what I'm saying is you can interchange these options. Yes, initially at the ends, we start off this way because you have to have some flexibility, but they can be interchanged within. But if you interchange some of those with the left turn lane, that's where you're going to lose it. So maybe I misspoke a little earlier about it being an end, but it's just trying to give us some reference of where it was the mid-block section was relative to the others. So.
Okay. All right. So the confusion then again is not having a bird's eye view and the sequencing of these three slides that make up the options. What I'm hearing now is they're kind of like puzzle pieces. You can move them around and stick a left turn lane section in the middle of the block if you wanted to. I don't know that that's a good solution, but having that bird's eye view of what the concept is would really help us to make, to give positive or constructive feedback here.
Okay.
So that's what I'm struggling with. All right. So
again, that's a great comment that
right.
we tried to introduce into the presentation.
Yeah. Sorry to
If I apologize if I can interrupt just to make myself known. Brian Fletcher with Calendar Associates, one of the consultants, been listening in. Please let me know if I can be a resource, whether you want me to answer any of these questions directly.
All right.
Thank you. We can go ahead and move on, but I just want to say that I do agree with all of Commissioner Martos's comments. It's just very hard to really conceptualize what we're talking about. So we're doing our best, but we might not be able to really fully understand the options without an aerial view, but we can go ahead and move on.
Okay, thank you. And I am taking notes of this, so we'll make sure to address those comments. And so last but not least, we have option C, which is the beautification option. It features a class 2 separated bike lane facility with parallel parking on one side and your regular nose-in angled parking on the other side. It also has the 10 feet turning lane and loading zone in the middle. Next slide. And so looking towards Primrose Road, we see that the turning lane has now been replaced with a planted median, which is the only change between the previous slide and this slide. And this is looking at the mid block. And this one also notes, so this is the only option that notes that that it also reflects the Primrose T intersection. And so here we see that, like the other two options, that has the bulb out with bioretention plantings. And so with this one, the bulb out is a little bit wider than the other two options, as you can see on the right side. And this one I believe is to accommodate the Primrose and Chapin Avenue intersection. So I'll just run. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you said that this was the mid block,
and Primrose pedestrian crossing.
Okay, because I'm a little confused. I thought you showed 2 slides prior to this one for this plan, the beautification one. Did I miss something? Like if you go back. And then back one more. Okay. So, I mean, you had been showing like the end and then the mid block. And so I'm a little bit lost because I feel like we saw 2 slides. I don't know. And is anyone else confused or is it just me?
So each option has 3 cross sections. Yeah. And I guess I'll just run through the next few slides and then we'll take questions all together, if that's okay. Again, here's a picture in San Francisco of a class 2 protected bike lane. Next slide. And our summary slide of how this option relates to the other 2. So this one's also good for bicyclists. There are some differences with this one with respect to motorists. It does call for a parking decrease. And there are limited opportunities for bioretention in this option because we lose that planted separate that. In the other option, we saw that there was a planted median that separates the bike lane and the parking that provided some stormwater treatment. And so this one has the least for stormwater capture. But there's also opportunities for street trees in this one. And so with that, I'll take questions. I know Brian is on the line. Thank you for joining us. So he might be able to help answer some questions that I wasn't able to address. But yeah, I'd like to open it up.
So through the chair.
Yes.
Yeah, on the last option there, I wanted, it would be helpful, the good, fair, poor qualitative measures. It would be good to get some quantitative measures there. When you say poor, how poor is it? Because if someone favors this option, option C, is the poor limited opportunities for bioretention, is it significant or is it just less than some of the other options? So having a quantitative measure there might be helpful when people have to make a decision, which is the best option.
Right, like how
Suggestion.
much square footage are we losing? That's a good
Yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
And I think also how many parking spots.
Yeah, so quantitative measures again would be helpful to back up data, data to back up these qualitative assessments as you compare the three options.
Thank you.
Do any of the other commissioners have any questions before we actually comment?
Through the chair?
Yeah.
Actually, there are a couple, Ms. Beatty would like to speak as well as Mr. Velasco.
Yes, I saw Mr. Velasco. I didn't get a note about Ms. Beatty. Sure.
All
So if there are no other questions, then let's move to Ms. Beatty. Would you like to speak first?
Sure. So I wanted to comment on this on behalf of BPAC. We did discuss it in our meeting just prior to this one. The first thing we wanted to say was that Chapin Ave has not been discussed as a priority on the bike ped plan. So I did want to call that forward where while this project seems great, we would not be supportive of a ton of bike ped money being spent on this, given that it really hasn't been discussed at all in any of the community workshops or on the from those consultants as being a top priority. And so we were curious how much bike ped money was being proposed from the city to be spent on this. We feel like these designs are very beautiful. Chapin Ave from a bike perspective is scary to bike down because cars flip U-turns all the time to try and park. And so we're supportive of the barrier in the middle because that does create a bike hazard. So we think some sort of barrier is good. We do think that there's traffic calming that's needed. We were less sold on the buffered bike lane. So option B and C, given that there are driveways, we didn't want to force cyclists into a bike lane that was going to have cars nosing out of Molly Stones into it. That felt like a dangerous situation. And so maybe that's not how the design would work, and we didn't understand that, but we did have that concern. And so we liked option A the best. We also wanted to note that the crossing at the ECR end is quite long and fairly dangerous. And so we would want that crosswalk also should be shortened the same way the Primrose one has been. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. And Mr. Velasco, would you like to speak?
Yes, commissioners, thank you. Good evening. I wanted to also mention that the aerial or bird's eye view would be really helpful. For one, I wanted to confirm that the intent is to maintain the left turns in and out so that the medians would be designed so that the left turns aren't prohibited, because trucks need to be able to make those direct left turns. There's no way a truck will be able to make a 180-degree U-turn if you force them to turn right and then have to go around. So that's really not possible. And then the other thing with the two bike lane options that Leslie had mentioned is that those kind of designs, those buffered bike lanes or separated bike lanes usually work when there are no driveways. So that would be like right next to a railroad track, like on Carolyn or a beach side or a promenade, where you don't have people like drivers turning in and out. Because one, drivers aren't expecting bicyclists to be like riding practically on the sidewalk, and bicyclists aren't really expecting drivers to be turning left or turning right in front of them. And with the visibility being limited by the cars, I think that's not a good setup for bicyclists and drivers to be. The third comment I had was I think a lot of the drawings, or maybe all of them, have the lanes like narrowed all the way down to 12 feet. So I wonder if that's something that the Central Coast Fire Department is willing to accept. That seems fairly narrow for them to be able to traverse with emergency vehicles. And then the thing that Leslie had also mentioned is that I was also interested in the cost. What's the funding plan for this? Like, how much is this going to cost? It's going to be a good stormwater project. It's going to be a pretty street at the end, but can we afford it? Like what is the funding plan for this project? And then lastly, I think there was mention made about jaywalking. My understanding is jaywalking doesn't really apply here. Like crossing in the middle of this block is not jaywalking. I don't think that's illegal. You're allowed to cross. You're not going to be forced to go all the way down to the end. I think that's allowed. So maybe that's something Mr. Wong can clarify. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, did you want to clarify our definition of jaywalking in Burlingame?
Sergeant Perna can jump in, but I believe jaywalking is walking between two controlled intersections, which this would be. But also, I think what we're trying to do is focus the pedestrians, because right now, if you have people walking across Chapin, at any point they'll cross. So it's just trying to provide a more convenient, no different than we did with the rectangular rapid flashing beacons along Peninsula. We're trying to get folks to cross where it's expected, and that also makes it a improved crosswalk. So.
Thank you. Okay, let's hear from the commissioners. How about Commissioner Bush? You've been quiet this evening. How about if you start us off?
Sure, thanks. So I guess my initial thought is similar to what the sentiment that Ms. Beatty said, that I don't know that Chapin necessarily connects to anything that's useful from a bicycle perspective. And so I think that, like, I actually use it quite a bit going to the St. Paul's school there across the way. And I think that, like, my concern is actually crossing as at each of the ends. So crossing El Camino, I don't know that there's a lot that we can do there because of the El Camino right of way. I think that similarly, at the end on Primrose, I think that that's like one of the critical areas where you have a lot of pedestrians crossing, and because of the parked cars on Primrose, like you have the cars that like are edging out into the crosswalk in order to see past that. So I almost feel like a lot of what needs to be done is sort of on the adjacent streets in order to make it safe. I do like the idea of that sort of like boulevard concept with sort of like a walk down the middle. I am concerned about looking at option A, like how much sort of discontinuity there is through the block, and maybe that would be straightened out once we saw the aerial view. But it does seem as though like we're transitioning to like 2 or 3 different parking schemes in a fairly like short distance. And so my concern would just be like how much continuity there is. I think that those are my main thoughts. I think, and I guess the other concern, and I think this is something that Commissioner Launder was mentioning before, was I think that there are some challenges with reverse in parking. I do think that it's better for bicyclists, particularly I'd like to see something like that along Howard. But I mean, I guess given the amount of bicyclists that are there, like I guess the question is whether that juice is worth the squeeze to make that happen. I guess those are some of my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Thanks. You can see I was nodding my head the whole time. And Commissioner Launder, would you like to speak?
Yes. Yeah, sure. Thank you. I don't see how options B and C at this stage is going to be very safe for cyclists with all the driveways. So to me, those 2 options are pretty unsafe for cyclists. And I was looking at option A, where there's a big center median, and thinking that maybe that whole center median could be a bikeway and room for pedestrians. I can't remember how wide it was, and that would keep everybody separated, and yet the driveways would be just going out into traffic without any regard that the cyclists might be there. So that's a possibility. And then it was mentioned that Chapin doesn't go anywhere, and it really doesn't, but yet it does, because it could be a good start to extending a bike route across El Camino on Chapin, and then linking into Occidental, and then onto Crystal Springs Road. I think it goes, and I didn't think of this. It was brought up in the DPAC meeting. So if that's a good idea, then it's theirs. If it's a bad idea, it's theirs also. But I think initially it seems like it doesn't go anywhere, but it could extend across El Camino eventually and link up with that area and allow people to go all the way to Crystal Springs. And let's see. I think it's an improvement. There is some concern about the funding, and I agree. I know it could be a stormwater project. I think there's $1 million that could come from a stormwater grant. So that's kind of, you know, a big chunk of the money, which it should be then, you know, for stormwater if we're going to get that kind of a grant. And I do favor. I think Commissioner Martos brought it up initially about the mid-block left turn. I think that's critical because that's such a long block, and now cars having to loop all the way around is just going to create a lot of conflicts all around. I think a mid-block break for vehicles is important. And yeah, I'm glad that BPAC was able to weigh in, and I think that is all. And I still am not 100% convinced about the reverse angle being that much superior to a regular angle. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioner Martos?
Thank you, Chair. So concur with what my fellow commissioners have already put forward, especially the reverse angle parking. I see that as being troublesome for a lot of people. And I would like to see numbers if we went parallel on both sides. What kind of numbers in parking loss would we incur, and is parking that severely limited on Chapin that if we went parallel on both sides that would have an effect? I'm glad BPAC was here. I initially liked the buffered bike lane, but then I, not being a cyclist, didn't think about all the driveways, and so now I'm kind of in favor of option A with a couple of caveats, and that is the reverse angled parking, as well as some kind of break in the center median for left turns. So other than that, a bird's eye view of how all these pieces go together would be great. So I have nothing else.
Thank you. Vice Chair Wetton?
So I'm reasonably open-minded about the designs, but I think for me, here's how I think about it, which is I think looking at the downtown overall, given the change in behaviors, given the addition of the parking garage on what was F&N, maybe other opportunities. It seems that over time, we may have a way of reducing the amount of surface area dedicated to parking in our downtown. That's something I think a lot of people think about in the medium-term future. Maybe not the short, definitely not the short-term future, but in the medium-term future, and maybe COVID is accelerating that. And as we think about that, I think we think about, okay, if we can remove surface area parking in downtown Burlingame, where do we want to do it? And maybe we would choose Chapin, but if we were looking at it holistically, it may be that there are other places in downtown Burlingame where we would really like to remove surface area parking. Like, we have lots J and E right in the middle of town. There have been aspirations for well over a decade to try and recreate a town square there. If we wanted to do something ambitious and reduce surface area parking in important real estate in downtown, we might want to do it somewhere else. And what I really don't want to do is back into that decision by looking at one sliver of Burlingame alone and not in its totality. So it would really scare me to knock out 50% of the parking on Chapin, which is a lot of spots, and maybe take away an opportunity down the road to do something on Lot J or Lot E, because we've now given up all this parking that we could have relied upon. So I guess I'm coming out of the same place everybody else. I think option A is probably the only one that I think is feasible, but for maybe different reasons than other people are coming to it. Because I think, again, you know, down the road, I'd like to see us reduce some surface area parking in Burlingame. And if we're going to do it, we may need to be greedy about parking around the periphery so we can afford to do it. If we ever want to like do something like a town square in lots E or J, we're going to need that parking on Chapin. And I don't think we should give up 50% of it. And I don't say that because I'm choosing parking over bike lanes. I say it because I want to be conscious of where we choose to reduce the parking. And I don't want to look at it just as a one-off. So I'd say option A, but I would go further. I'd say we should be really thoughtful before we eliminate any parking on Chapin for that reason, because I think we may want to reduce parking elsewhere and rely on Chapin. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess it's me. I have some concerns about all of the plans, and I'm not convinced that any of those three plans are our best option. I think that, you know, I don't feel comfortable with selecting any one of them at this point. I would like to look at other configurations. So not to reiterate what everyone else has said, however, you know, I agree with Commissioner Bush that, you know, it is problematic to have each little section of the road have a different setup. People do get confused. You know, in a perfect world, if we were all perfect navigators, maybe not a problem, but to have an island and then reverse backing in, and then I just think that can be confusing. So I have a problem with having very different sections. I think they need to fit together more seamlessly, and I think an aerial overview is going to be necessary for us to be able to see that and really understand it. I also think that one thing we really aren't thinking about is that there are a lot of bigger businesses and stores, industries on Chapin, and eliminating the left-hand turn for, you know, these semi trucks that are making deliveries to Bevmo and to Molly Stone's is really problematic. And they're not going to be able to go to the end of the block and make any kind of U-turn. And even if they could, I mean, it would be, I think, very dangerous for pedestrians, cyclists, and other cars. So I'm not sure that that's, you know, it seems like we might really be setting up a problem. You know, where are these bigger vehicles that use Chapin? How are they supposed to navigate that? My other thought is, you know, the same thing with the bike lanes, that I'm not sure that this is the best place to spend our money or to give up parking or other things for really dedicated bike lanes as opposed to Sharrows, where, you know, Chapin isn't really a major thoroughfare because bikes aren't really coming down El Camino. And I feel like even if we are going to do an east-west corridor, which we've all said, you know, we wanted to see in the big master plan, well, I don't know that we should be building out Chapin as part of that before we've decided where this east-west route is best situated. And to spend that money, it seems kind of like short-sighted to spend a lot of money developing this as a really heavily bike trafficked route. Without looking at the bigger scheme of things, it's too soon to do that, I think, to make that commitment, in my opinion. So I would like to see I would definitely like to revisit this again before it goes to the public. I think the public is going to be very confused. And I would like for us as a commission to at least select or help guide some better choices before we bring it to the public, the general public.
Through the chair. I did get a response. We got a text and regarding jaywalking. So as I said earlier, I'll bring the expert in, Sergeant Perna, who will be able to fully define that. So if I could, there.
Hey, everyone. So yeah, 21955 of the vehicle code just states it's crossing between adjacent intersections controlled by a traffic control device. So, I mean, I think that would apply on Chapin personally. You have a stop sign at one end and you have a signalized traffic signal at the other end. So for people to cross Chapin without moving towards an intersection, that would be jaywalking.
Thank you. Thanks. And actually, let me just bring up one last point because that did remind me. I didn't say that I did like the idea of some sort of median strip or landing point for pedestrians, because that is actually a very difficult place to cross. I just need to make sure that we also are allowing the left-hand turn lanes and perhaps loading zone or whatever else we need. And I'm not sure the best way to satisfy both needs. Okay.
So I think, thank you. I think we got what we wanted out of this. And yes, by the time we come back to the public, we will clarify it a little bit more so it's a lot easier to go through. But the comments were helpful because I think it points staff and the design team in a direction to how to tweak it. So we thank you for your comments.
Great. Certainly is going to be prettier than what it is now, whatever we decide. Okay, let's, that brings us to 6C, Burlingame Avenue and Broadway Street closure pilot program updates. So I don't know the results of Monday's meeting, but I do know they were discussing Broadway following suit with Burlingame Avenue. So take it away, Mr. Wong.
All right, hopefully I can get up the correct. Now, sorry, chair. There we go. All right. So what I wanted to do here is just give you an update on what's been happening. This is something we've been working on, the Burlingame Avenue and Broadway Street closure pilot program. A couple different things that council's kind of weighed in, just giving you the latest. So first is quickly give you we'll go over the background, give you update on the Burlingame Avenue closure as it is today. And then we'll show you what the Broadway closure looks like, as well as review downtown parklets and then any feedback you guys might have. Right. So in a nutshell, on the June 9th council meeting, the council directed staff to create a 1-month pilot project for the closure of Burlingame Avenue from Friday evening, for all day Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And then also at that meeting, staff wanted us to review the possibility of parklets on the side streets or other streets in the Burlingame downtown. And then the Broadway bid had also expressed an interest in some outdoor dining options for them. At the June 24th economic development meeting, they saw proposals for parklets on not only Burlingame Avenue, or I'm sorry, not only Burlingame downtown, but as well as on Broadway was an option, as well as closure. So they reviewed that. I think the economic development, their recommendation was to go with Saturday, Sunday closure of Broadway, because they felt that the parklets, I'll go through them, but they'll be left out there. They wouldn't be picked up, so they would be out there and we'd lose that parking. So that was their big concern. So they wanted to somehow help the business, and they saw that as the best option. And then at the Monday's city council meeting, council reviewed the 3 items we just talked about, and regarding outdoor dining, and here's the update. Sorry. So it's fair to say that the input that we've gotten regarding the existing Burlingame Avenue street closure is, it's been strong. Folks have enjoyed it. I've only seen the photos of it, but folks are out there, and the businesses, we've got a feedback with our PW engineering folks stating that they love it. They want it to continue. They hope it continues on, and not just during this. But the big drawback that we've gotten is folks not wearing masks, and there have been just some folks not social distancing. So between the good comments and the bad comments like that, it's been 50-50. In order to try to address the social distancing and the lack of masks, both the DBID and staff have increased our signage as well as announcements in the e-news, and the kiosk, as well as some of the businesses have been putting signs in there indicating wear a mask. So that was important. And the other big thing is council did support extending this program through September. So that is something that is good. And they've also empowered us to, in order for us to continue, if this can be something more permanent, we would have to go through a California environmental quality review process, because by shutting down the street, there are unintended consequences where we may reroute traffic. And so that's something we have to look at and be able to clear through that. So that is the latest on the Burlingame Avenue closure. Broadway. So what we've discussed at both the Economics Development Subcommittee meeting as well as City Council was what's happening on Broadway. And now that you guys are probably tired of seeing these cross sections, but here's what we have existing on Broadway. We have roughly a 11-foot angled space, 12-foot drive lane in each direction, and angled on the other space. So with a closure, what we're talking about is just closing it off and be able to have outdoor seating in that parking area. So actually they would have more than Burlingame Avenue, because we only have an 8-foot parking strip here. Here we would have an 11 because of the angled parking. And so the aerial view that we've been asking, what the plan would be is to close not the entire Broadway, but to close it between Chula Vista and Laguna and Paloma and Cappuccino. The reason, and again, the Burlingame, you're all familiar with, the Burlingame Avenue and Broadway are different. Here we have one major roadway that is a commercial area, and around it is primarily residential. We have one-way streets, so we need to keep those open, because closing it would trap vehicles here or send vehicles down the wrong way for an extended amount of time. By doing this, folks, if they come onto Broadway, we've left Cappuccino open so they would be able to circulate Cappuccino to Carmelita, and same coming here. If they came across the tracks, there's an outlet here at Chula Vista. The one where we would also do is at Rionette here. We close it off here because by closing it here, sending northbound vehicles on south of Broadway on Laguna, they'd be stuck. So we'd have some way for them. They'd have to exit on Rionette or continue northbound on Laguna. So with this proposal, we are looking at roughly a loss of about 57 spaces. And what council has approved us to do is, after much discussion, the closure would begin 4 p.m. on Saturday and run through 10 p.m. on Sunday. There was, I think the Broadway bid wanted to have a Friday be a point where they closed because of the heavier restaurant business on that day. However, that we had significant concerns regarding traffic at that hour of shutting it down and what might happen. So what council has approved this, and it would be a 2-week program. So we'd come back and revisit. That is it for Broadway. And we'll take questions if you have any at the end. That's okay. And then the other item council discussed on Monday night was parklets on the Primrose Road, Park Road, as well as Howard and Lorton. So what we do, and just kind of take this as a cross section for some of those. We've got the parking on each side of a particular street, and then we would implement installing, they would have tables and chairs. But what's different about this, we need to maintain the street being open. We would have these water-filled barriers, basically construction barriers. So folks aren't gonna be able to push it over. And if a car hits it, it's gonna nudge it. It's not gonna run right through it as A-frames would. So this is a way to just add it to make it improve safety for both the patrons as well as give a nice delineation for the vehicles. And so this is what we're talking about, these heavy filled, water filled barriers. We've got tables and chairs set up within it and the extent of it. And again, in the Burlingame downtown, it varies. In certain spaces, we have parallel parking, and then other spaces we have angled parking. So on some of the angled spaces, you're gonna get a little bit more depth on that, but you might not get the width along the frontage of the businesses. So we've gone out, well, this is an example of an extended one. We've actually gone out and we've marked a bunch of these locations. So these are the kind of locations that we've looked at where there's different restaurants. So these were what the parklets would be along the roadway. We seem to have the majority of the businesses, restaurant businesses were on Primrose and Lorton. And we did have requests and we went out and looked as well as Howard and not shown on here, but we have some on Chapin being a Stella Alpina. If the worst case scenario, this area encompasses about 205 parking spaces. There would be a loss of roughly 63. Staff has gone out. We've marked out locations so we can have that discussion with the businesses of this is what it is, and in turn they have to get their permits in. We've enhanced our encroachment permit for sidewalks and chairs, and it'll be, as council directed, no fee. So as we move on, we have rules, established requirements for this. All restaurants and retail businesses, members of the public must abide by the state of California health orders. With this is social distancing. Restaurants must continue to follow the county health orders for serving food and have personal protective equipment. All sales and service of alcohol will still be under the California Alcoholic Beverage Act. So they will have to have their license cleared in order to serve out there. Restaurants using the city right away. That again, this is where the permit, we're allowing them to do this, but they must do it in a responsible way. They can't shove the tables together and try to maximize that safe. They still have to practice the social distancing and try to have their staff be masked. For the sidewalks, we're not expanding. They're not able to expand if they don't have it already onto the sidewalks because we have to maintain the ADA access. So they're not going to be able to just put more tables and chairs on sidewalks. And each restaurant, it has to be kind of responsible for using roughly the frontage in front of the restaurant that we're granting them. And lastly, all tables and chairs must be removed from the sidewalk at the end of the day. And the reason is this is also generating more trash on the street. So we're trying to clean it. So we need them to pull all those tables and chairs out so we can run the street sweeper down it. Again, we've modified our encroachment permit for this particular need, being the tables and chairs in the roadway. And also both bids are going to act as liaisons between the businesses and the city in order to work on this. We're working with them because they know the contacts immediately, and we're working with them by supplying surveys that we're getting the input back from. And the big one is, lastly, the program can be ended. It's to be run through the end of September, but if we find that there's increased traffic, if there's some circulation issues, safety, parking, or continuing social distancing and face covering, we can terminate the program early. However, as far as the traffic and circulation, we haven't had issues, so that's good news, and we haven't had any emergencies. So hopefully that went over. Just a quick summary of what council went through. And also, if you have some questions today, we have our economic committee member, Joe Sanfilipino. He could answer some questions of what's happened at the ED meetings. So with that, I will turn it back to Chair Israel. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we take any comments from the public, or is this just an informational item?
It's a discussion item, so let me see if we have anyone from the public. I'll check with Stephanie as well. Ms. Brewer.
There's no emails to the public comment email address.
Okay.
No hands raised.
Okay.
All right. Commissioner Martos, would you like to start off?
Sure, thank you, Chair. Broadway, question, Mr. Wong. So the closure at Chula Vista of Broadway, does that allow, and I could probably look this on a Google map, but does that allow entrance into the Walgreens parking lot? Commissioner Wander shaking his head yes.
Yeah, I believe that driveway, you can have access to both driveways.
Okay, so you can enter, okay, you can enter Walgreens even with that section of Broadway closed at Chula Vista.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Chair,
Okay.
by having access on both Chula Vista and Cappuccino, it allows you to use definitely Lot Y, and I think it's Lot D, but the other one by Chase. So you have access to those lots, and as well as lots B and Q with access through Paloma.
Okay. So I was a little concerned about the late closure on Saturday of Broadway. I don't know how that was determined, but you know, lunch on Saturday on Broadway might be a nice thing for people. Strolling up and down Broadway on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon might be a nice thing for people. I don't know how much 4 hours or 6 hours of time on Saturday is gonna, you know, make a big difference. So, you know, it would, to me, it'd be nice to see Broadway closed early on Saturday morning and not reopen until late on Sunday night. And I just think that time period is 4 p.m. on Saturday to 10 p.m. on Sunday is kind of limited. So those are my comments on Broadway. Moving on to Burlingame Avenue. So, but I will say that I do like the idea of closing Broadway, at least on the weekends. But I would, you know, advocate for a little more time on Saturday there. On Burlingame Avenue, the parklets, the individual park. Quite another question, Mr. Wong, through the chair. Do the individual parklets allow parking in between them? Will there be parallel parking available or?
Through the chair, I believe the question Commissioner Martos had was, in between parklets, will there be the ability to park? And the answer is yes. There'll be breaks within it. And sorry, I failed to mention this, but these parklets will remain for the duration. These will not be picked up. They will remain there until this program is over, because these are obviously heavy and it's going to be a huge effort on the courtyard to get those set up. And then we're not going to pick them up and move them each time. And that's why we're kind of going through this, making sure the businesses understand when we put it there, because there will be a loss of parking, right, for the duration, but it's a trade-off, right? We're trying to trade the parking to allow them the ability to have outdoor dining. But yes, if there's a between parklets, you can park. And we've tried to, like, we've marked them out. We've tried to make it so you're not taking up half a parking space, right? We're going to try to just take up what we can. And we tried to be fair to the businesses. I think roughly each space they're getting is roughly 300 square feet, just shy of that, but it's equal. If you have a business that fronts your parking is parallel, we'll take 2 spaces. If you have angled parking, we'll actually take 3, but it comes out roughly the same amount of space. So we try to be as fair as we could through this program.
Okay, and then the other question or concern that I had was on the individual parklets. There's, the right angles. So I'm wondering, if I'm sitting at a table close to that right angle of the parklet and there's cars coming down the street, am I concerned that, ooh, boy, if a car hits that barrier, am I going to get crunched by one of these barriers? So I'm kind of wondering, how resistant are these barriers to impact, upon impact, and I guess the second part of that, and this might, not fall within your budget, but would it be possible to reduce the speed on the streets to say what our school district or our school speeds are, 15 miles per hour, when we have these parklets installed? So any response there, Mr. Wong?
Sure. Let's see. Just regarding the barriers themselves, they're about half a ton each, and we will on the street. So on the street side, we will pin those together. So if you've got 3 of them, obviously that's a ton and a half. If you've got 4, so they'll be pinned together so they're all kind of interlocked, so they act as one. The one on the non-traffic end, if you're having a head-on, you're going to hit one, but the opposite end, that's the one we'll probably leave that's floating a little bit, so we can try to make the space. But the ones where an impact will come, those will be the ones that'll be set up for if something were to happen. It's going to be tied together. Reducing the speed limit, it's something we'll take a look at. Already the speeds are in the downtown are supposed to be 25 in that area, but we're using up on Broadway, as you saw that. Some of the other things that we'll be doing is putting on Carmelita as well as Lincoln speed limit signs to reduce the speed. No different than we did on the Carroll closure. They're not black on white signs and necessarily enforceable, but they're more of, hey, or black on orange, something you might see in a construction zone to just try to get folks to just get them to be aware. That's what we're trying to do. Does that, I believe.
So that's a maybe on the speed limits.
We hadn't talked about that. I know the sign shops
Okay.
we're running out of signs. These the speed
Yeah.
they
Okay.
got material to put them on.
Okay. That's a definite maybe.
That's a definite maybe, but we're going to be monitoring, as with all this,
All right.
like we did for Burlingame Avenue closure. We're going to
Yeah.
be looking and making adjustments.
Okay. So I like, again, I like it. I liked the closure of Burlingame Avenue. In fact, I like not only liked, but I like it. We go down there every weekend, have dinner on the Ave, walk the Ave. I love it. For Sergeant Perna, I will say that, yeah, there's a lot of people that aren't wearing masks. And I don't see anybody in a blue uniform reminding people to wear masks. I know there's signs that say wear your mask. I don't know if there's a couple extra officers that could walk up and down and casually remind people to wear your masks, as they should wear masks as well, and set a good example. I know that is a concern, and I see a lot of people just being real casual with not wearing masks on the Ave. So just an FYI from someone who's been there every weekend now. But I think it's an excellent way to put a benefit out there for the community as we have all this shelter in place and try and be safe. It's good to get out and enjoy our downtown, which is really spectacular. So that's all I have.
Sorry, Chair, through the chair, one other thing I forgot to address for Commissioner Martos. You asked about 4 p.m. on Saturday. I think initially we had talked about all day on Saturday, but the Broadway bid had a concern because there's a lot of service businesses on there that would lose parking. And so they wanted to maintain that parking because most of the appointments for hair, nails, exercise are in the morning and afternoon. So that's how that came about.
Okay, well, their opinion definitely carries weight. They have a vested interest, so I'll go with their opinion on that one. No problem.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Launder, do you have any questions, comments?
I just have one question and then some comments. So my question is, did I understand it correctly that Broadway is going to be for 2 weeks, 2 weekends? And when would it start?
Sure. It won't start this weekend. It'll start next weekend.
Okay.
And it is. So council wanted to take a first 2-week look, and potentially it could be extended, but they wanted to see kind of fed out like what's happening if we need to make adjustments. So
Okay,
that's why that's a 2-week period.
So this weekend it will not be, but the following week and the week after that.
Correct.
And then there's going to be 3 more weekends before council meets again. They're not meeting again until August 17th. So how's that going to work?
Through the chair, because council needs their break, and that was city manager was well aware of that. So they've provided that staff has the ability to make some of the changes if we need to based on that. So council can still have the break, and they were council approved the project or the program as is. So that's the direction.
Okay, so it could, at staff's discretion, continue or make modifications to extend it till September or whenever, when council gets back.
Yes.
Okay, good. And so I think both programs are really good. And I guess as long as I've started on Broadway, I'll finish. I think, I can't see my notes. So I think Broadway is going to be a lot tougher because of the way the streets are laid out, and they're narrow and they're one way, and there's a lot of people that live on those streets, as opposed to Burlingame Avenue, which is more of a commercial area than a residential area. And there's not any real single family homes or anything like that. There's a few apartments, over by City Hall. And I'm not even sure there's too many residentials between Burlingame Avenue and Howard. But anyways, we do have a history with the Pet Parade of closing Broadway down. So that's pretty much the same area that's closed down for the Pet Parade. So I'm hopeful that we've learned something in 10 years or so of Pet Parades. And I'm a little concerned about the restaurants that are on either end of Broadway. There's a few restaurants on whatever block that is, next to California, between that and Walgreens, and then the last block, the 1400 block, I think. So I don't know if they've expressed any concerns about that, but there are a few restaurants there that might feel like they've been left out in some way. So I was just wondering if there's any provisions for those blocks where it's not going to be shut down, or are they just going to have tables on the sidewalk, or what?
And that's something that we'll look at. Potentially, they could have a parklet, but we just have to see what the traffic is like, because those are the ends that are going to be trying to get cars off of Broadway. So we'll take a look at that, but that is something that's come up in our discussions.
Okay, good. And so that's what I have on Broadway now, Burlingame Avenue. I've been there, I guess I was not there on the 4th of July weekend, but I was there the other 2 weekends. And I had that concern, not only when the street is closed down, but in general, that I haven't done a detailed analysis of how many people are wearing masks, but it seems to me that less than half are wearing masks. And it seems to be, you know, like party time, which is fine, except some of these party timers are not real concerned about social distancing amongst themselves or with, say, some old folks that happen to be walking down the street, who literally have to walk into the street when there's no street closures to avoid unmasked people who are just congregating on the sidewalk. So there are some old people that do walk into the street, and figuring that they can negotiate a car better than they can negotiate a airborne kind of thing floating around on the sidewalk. So I think that's still, and as we're well aware, that's an issue. But I think it's good that there's going to be parklets, at least it'll help with everything. And I think it's good that there's going to be more signage and education. I don't know if that's enough. You might have to put some, as John calls them, Commissioner Martos calls them blue uniforms on the street, and I'm sure a lot of people will not necessarily take kindly to that, but it might have to be done. So, and I'm also glad that it's extended until September. So I guess that's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Bush?
Thank you. I had a couple of questions through the chair to Specialist Sanfilippo.
Yeah.
So on the Burlingame Avenue, how have the non-restaurant businesses fared during the weekend with the street closure?
We have an active survey out with the DBID that we're still gathering responses for right now. Unfortunately, we have not heard on Burlingame Avenue specifically from many retailers because many of them are chain businesses and they're not necessarily in tune with the community, but it is a concern of ours as well.
Got it. So that's still like to be determined. I mean, my expectation would be that those businesses actually do better because there's more foot traffic. And I guess in my thinking, I think pedestrians make purchases, cars don't. And so I guess I would like to ultimately see a way to get the street closure down to for the full week. Because I think that ultimately, most of those businesses would actually be better off if we were able to close it off. And I think that it sort of mitigates a number of concerns that Commissioner Launder voiced. So I'd be very curious to see like how well those businesses were doing during the weekends with the street closed.
Yeah, and the DBID during the research, they had some evidence for retail businesses in other areas, like when street closures were implemented in Europe or other jurisdictions in America, and many retailers benefited substantially from the closure. So we haven't seen it yet just because people aren't responding to the survey yet, but that is a good theory, I would say.
Cool. Yeah, so I think that it would be great if we could collect evidence to support like a closure longer term, understanding that we're not going to make such a drastic move until we have the evidence in hand that would be beneficial for them. I guess from my perspective, that's been my vision for Burlingame Avenue since I moved in. I think that it would be an awesome pedestrian zone, and figuring out a way to make that happen, I think would be very desirable. On the so moving on to the parklets, I guess one question that I had on those was whether we've considered any additional materials or mechanisms to make those safe. I guess I've seen, you know, in the sort of like the standard like park day, which is like a thing in New York where they turn parking spaces into parks. A lot of times they just like use like an elevated, you know, wood platform with, I guess I call it astroturf. Is that the fake grass on top? And so then like it's like much more inviting than like the water barriers. Obviously, it doesn't offer the same level of protection that the water barriers do. And then I guess the other thing I was thinking about was in the wake of 9/11 in New York, they put out like big planters to protect the like vital buildings. I almost think that that might be aesthetically more pleasing, but understand that that probably carries with it significantly higher costs to do that. But I think that sort of like thinking through like how to make it aesthetically pleasing, given that it's going to be out there for the long term, constantly. I don't know that I'm necessarily as concerned as Commissioner Martos on cars, given that they are going 25 miles per hour, and those are pretty. Those are streets that don't necessarily get a lot of speed, but I understand that like there are going to be a number of people that would be concerned about that. But I guess my mental model is thinking, you know, like we have restaurants on the street, and the only thing that's protecting them there is a you know, what, a 4-6 inch curb, and so like I think that, you know, to the extent that there's a little bit of a buffer, like even just having a little bit of elevation might be sufficient in order to like, you know, make it work. On Broadway, I agree with Commissioner Launder that I think it's a lot more challenging problem because it's much more of a thoroughfare that people use to get from point A to point B, not just as a destination. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of sort of secondary effects of closing it down. So I think that you're likely going to see more traffic on Carolyn coming and crossing at Oak Grove. I think that you're going to see a lot more coming down Carmelita, using it to get through town. I mean, I think that like with having it Saturday to Sunday, like I think that there's not as much traffic, but then I guess I would say that that's probably equally applicable during the week because a lot of people are not going to work. And so, I mean, I think that it would be great to collect data and see if it would be feasible to to bring it for a full week. I mean, I'm in favor of these. I'm like rooting it on. I'm like saying, how can we do more? So I guess that's my perspective.
Thanks. Vice Chair Wetton.
First, I just want to echo what Commissioner Martos said about masks. It's a little outside our remit here, but you know, to put things in perspective, it's potentially a matter of life and death. And I'm glad that Commissioner Martos said something. I think we've done decently in Northern California, avoiding the surge we've seen in other areas. And I really, really want to keep it that way. So I'm glad that Commissioner Martos said something. This is a question I've been asking now for at least 6 weeks. And maybe Mr. Sanfilippo can help answer it, but I want to know how restaurants on Burlingame Avenue are doing with their takeout and delivery businesses with the streets closed. I want to know how it's impacting them, and I want to know if there's anything that they need to mitigate potential issues with people coming to get takeout or DoorDash or you know, Grubhub or whoever, Uber Eats, you know, drivers for whom it's a little harder to park and get to their restaurants. I want to know what the impacts are. I know it's good for the restaurants to be able to have the offer the dine-in option. That's a big reason why you're doing this. But I want to hear more about those impacts. Have we gotten any feedback along those lines?
There is a question in the DBID survey that's pending that addresses takeout business during outdoor dining. It's been discussed in the past that perhaps distribution points may be possible, so multiple restaurants using one point that delivery drivers can use, but I think it's still being evaluated pending traffic circulation studies, if I'm right in that, Andy.
Yeah, that's correct. And we were working with the DBID to try to find locations that they, certain businesses that may have needs for that. We've tried Lot M right now. During the closure, there's about 8 10-minute spaces for pickup. And over by Stella Alpina, I believe there's a couple there as well during the closure. So.
I really think, this is obviously moving fast, and we're going to keep getting questions on this. And I really feel like we need to know the answer and to get feedback from the restaurants for us to give an informed opinion on what's going on here. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to help, at least in part, is to help these restaurants. And if this is something they need to make this work, I want to know, and I want to know how the city is going to facilitate that.
Yeah.
One other specific, and particularly as we move it to Broadway, one thing to note about Broadway is some of those restaurants don't have back doors that are accessible. So if you're on that first block of Broadway off El Camino, Lot P is behind those restaurants, but there's a fence and stuff. You can't just walk in from Lot P and get to a restaurant's back door. And there's other parts of Broadway that don't back up to a lot where they could serve anything out of their back door. So if you're closing the front and someone is, they're trying to get their food to take out and delivery, this may be a real issue. And I think it's something we should be thinking ahead on. The last thing on Broadway, if you don't mind, Mr. Wong, I think I'm trying to figure out it's the Broadway closure restriction signage map, the aerial overview. I don't know if there's a way for you to put that one up. I think you went by it.
That was.
Yeah, that's it. So, if we're taking away not quite half of the parking on Broadway, the accessibility of those 3 lots is going to be really important, Q, P, and Y. I guess I don't mean to leave that in R. I should add that one. This is a nuance, but technically you're not supposed to drive through Lot Q and then drive into Lot P. But now more than ever, since you cannot drive down Broadway and make a left on Paloma to get to Lot P, and you cannot drive, you're not supposed to drive up Laguna and get into Lot P. You can't get there that way, and you can't drive. Lot P becomes very, very difficult to access. You have to drive all the way south, get on Paloma, and get up. So one thing I would recommend is that we maybe formalize something that people have probably been doing for a long time anyway, and make it permissible, or even put the appropriate signage there for people to go through Lot Q to Lot P. Otherwise, Lot P will be almost impossible to get to. And getting to these parking lots is going to be a lot more important. So that would be one specific recommendation if we're going to be doing this on a regular basis on Broadway, that we kind of allow the people, we're going to want people to get to lot P. That is one lot where Starbucks backs up to, Young Ken Walks sort of backs up to, the Japanese restaurant there backs up to, I think there's a couple others. So we're going to want people to be able to get to lot P, and, you know, going south to Carmelita and then back up Paloma may not be practical for people. So that's one other particular point. I think that's all I have.
Thank you. I guess as far as my comments, I love the Burlingame Avenue being closed and having it as a sort of European pedestrian thoroughfare. I'm a little bit concerned though about the parklets, just because we are taking up so much parking, and I feel like we've talked about scarcity of parking for years. I know it's COVID, but still, you know, a lot of people aren't within like I'm not really within walking distance, easy walking distance of Burlingame Avenue. And I just wonder how it's going to affect the retailers, those who are not restaurants that, you know, really, you know, might want sort of daytime people park and wander around and shop. So I'm just would like to wait and see as far as the parklets go, maybe some unintended consequences for non-restaurant businesses. So, and then as far as Broadway, you know, I guess I have a very different take on it. You know, I feel like Broadway is such a thoroughfare between El Camino, Route, you know, 82, and 101, one of our two arteries that go up and down the peninsula. And if we do close it down on the weekends, it'll be interesting to see how much traffic does get diverted to those very small streets with, you know, tons of street parking that are around that area. It'll be interesting to see if there are any problems, if neighborhoods start to feel the pinch. So I'm glad we're leaving the cross streets open. I guess I'm just not as excited about the shutting down Broadway. I feel like there are far fewer restaurants per block that benefit from this, and that it is such a major direct route to a highway from a highway. But if it's what the city wants to try out, you know, we can see how it goes. So maybe I'm the only naysayer in the bunch, but you know, we'll try it.
Through the chair, and that's why I think we're at a 2-week kind of trial and see how it goes, because staff had concerns. Originally, the proposal was to basically make Broadway an entire parklet and put those barriers up on blocks long, so we can continue to have traffic on Broadway. But again, the trade-off was you lose all that parking, and so we're trying to find the balancing point.
Through the chair, I just want to comment on the parking in Burlingame Ave, just because I've been down there a couple times, and I've tried to go even at very prime times to get a sense of whether it's constrained. And I have to say, like zero problem getting a space. I mean, especially if you know to go to Lot W. I'm very thankful we finally converted that. There's always been, Lot W's always had plenty of spaces, and that's very centrally located to anywhere you need to get. You know, whether it's Saturday night for a restaurant or earlier in the day on Saturday. So at least while we're in COVID, I think it's okay. I think once we get back to normal life, that I agree it's going to be a very different story. I'm not sure if it's going to be sustainable, but you know, for now, I think it's okay. I do worry a lot about Broadway, because even if there are enough spaces, you know, Lot Y, Lot P, Lot Q in COVID conditions, you don't, even if you know, 79 spaces may well be sufficient. it's very challenging to get to those lots. So I think we just need to be mindful of that and mindful that there are a lot of restaurants on Broadway and they do a ton of takeout business. Like when I've been on Broadway at night since the quarantine, there's tons of people just waiting outside the different restaurants. And like I said, a lot of those restaurants do not have back doors. So I think, you know, we have to really engage in an active dialogue to make sure that works. So sorry to take a second turn, but I did want to.
No, that's okay. And I agree. You know, it wouldn't surprise me if more than 50% of some of, not Roca or some of the more sit down restaurants, but it wouldn't surprise me if more than 50% of the business is takeaway. And so, yeah, it might be nice to have, you know, parklets but, you know, if there's no parking to access your restaurant and, you know, and it's not as easy to get DoorDash or takeaway, that can be a negative impact. And also, I think one thing for us to keep in mind is like, it is the most gorgeous summer and spring we've had in Northern California for years. It'll be interesting to see as the weather, you know, changes. I don't think can be a year-round thing. You know, it gets dark earlier, it rains, but it may end up being seasonal.
So I had a question. If I
Go
could.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to conduct a small informal poll. I know that Commissioner Marto said that he's dined downtown. My wife and I have gone downtown on Burlingame Avenue. We have not gone to Broadway at all. So I'm only talking about Burlingame Avenue. We've picked up food from various places on Burlingame Avenue and have taken it home to eat. And we haven't sat down at any restaurant ever since the middle of March. And I was just curious that we have never bought anything other than the food we're getting on Burlingame Avenue or wherever downtown. And I was just wondering if Commissioner Martos or if anybody else has dined in and then went to another store and bought something else, or when, you know, at least went into the store, because we haven't done that. And I was just curious, and so it looks like Vice Chair Whitten has done that.
I'll volunteer one experience where we did dine at a restaurant for our anniversary. But I'll tell you, I was a little uncomfortable. It was not on Burlingame Avenue. It was on Howard. I don't want to call out the restaurant, but you know, the sidewalks were busy and we're sitting there, and I couldn't really have my mask on. And I candidly, and I hate to be a bad booster of our local restaurants, but I didn't love it. But I will say, having dined in, we walked by the studio shop where they sell a lot of art. And we looked in and what they had on the walls. We didn't get anything that night, but we went back. So potentially a pretty big retail purchase from that one meal that that I didn't necessarily love.
Anybody else? Anybody else dine in?
So this is explicitly shopping and dining, or just dining?
Well, either one. I don't know when I'll be comfortable sitting down at a restaurant. I don't know when I'll be comfortable getting on an airplane or lots of other things that I normally do. But I was just curious about, number one, anybody else has been dining in, but then combining it with a shopping trip to another retailer.
So we have dined outside. I don't know that we've done any retail.
So I'd be interested to see what, so I'm sorry, John.
No, I was going to say, so I was fairly comfortable. We had masks on as we were on the sidewalk waiting for a table. Most people had masks on when they were on the sidewalk. I saw a lot of people walking down the street in the middle with no masks. But as we were seated at our table, we had plenty of distance between us and the next table and us and anybody that was walking down the middle of the street. And so at that point, we removed our masks, and I was fairly comfortable with that. You know, subsequent to dining, we went down the street and got ice cream at one of the other real retailers. So we did, yeah,
A little bit.
we did visit somebody else, but yeah, I was surprised that place right across. I'll eat at the Mexican restaurant right there, La Corneta, and I was surprised that Starbucks right across the street wasn't open at 6 o'clock at night. That's their business decision. So yeah, so we were okay with it. We seem to be able to keep our distance from others, and you know, been doing it every week since.
Good. All right.
Okay.
End of survey. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, let's move on to the informational item number 7, the information items with the engineering division reports.
Thank you, Chair Islet, and we'll make up some time here if that's the case. Not too much to report because we have stuff going, but not much is changing. So unfortunately, we found out between this meeting and the last meeting that we did not get the $125 million infra grant for the Broadway grade separation, which is bad news, but it's also not so bad because we're not ready to take all the money to build it right now. So by the time we have the next cycle comes up, we'll be ready to, I imagine we'll be ready to reapply. So we've at least gone through the process once, and yeah, so that's that. And we've also, as I mentioned, previous meetings this week, we at the end of June, the final design proposals were due. There were 4 teams that were in there, and we're going through it. And there's some intriguing. I can't reveal the details, but there are some intriguing ideas that I think the community would be happy to hear. But hopefully, it comes out. So we'll at some point I'll be able to discuss that with you if that's what happens. Sorry, it's not listed on here because I got this information late, but Commissioner Wetton had requested a little update on lots F and N. And so I just have a little bit of tentative dates that it looks like they're on schedule. We're looking at the garage being done next spring, and the housing element the summer of 2022. So we're not years away for the garage. We're half a year, several months away. So just to give you that. And rather than go through the priority list, I just wanted to point out, and I believe you all were sent some information on the North Rollins specific road plan. And our community development director has let us know that he's looking for a member to be on their community advisory committee. So I will turn that over to Chair Israel to see who might be interested.
Sure. So as you guys probably hopefully had time to read the letter, this is for the new development and residence and parks that will be happening on the northern end of Rollins. And the commitment's not a lot. It's 3 meetings over almost like a year. Meetings happening on weekdays between an hour, maybe max hour and a half. So I wondered if anybody was interested in getting engaged with this new neighborhood that's going up.
There are 3 meetings. I'd be willing to do that.
Oh, cool.
Likewise.
Okay. Awesome. I think it'll be a really interesting project, and it's a new thing for our city. And I think both of you would be able to really give, good insights as to things that they need to be paying attention to that they might not really be aware of. So is it just one person, Mr. Wong, that we select?
I believe it's just one, and I can see what the options are for that next person to not necessarily be a commissioner, but be a public member if there's any public members, but I can float that. And
okay.
Who would be A, and who's the name I should put in?
Do you guys feel, do either of you, are you really dying to do it or just sort of trying to help me out or?
No. I was on the general plan committee, and so we talked about that area and that development, and I just wanted to see it through a little further, but I'm willing to bring in new ideas and let Vice Chair Wetton take that role, and I could attend as maybe a public member.
Okay. Why don't we do
If
that?
he has a burning desire, it's up to you.
No, I'm flexible. I mean, there's a precedent. Commissioner Launder and I worked on the ECR task force together. And technically, I think started out, I was the choice and Commissioner Launder was the alternate, but I had some conflicts. So I think we flipped it around at some point and I became the alternate. But we both attended most of the sessions and spoke in the end. And so if it looks anything like that, I don't think it's a real issue.
Okay, I will check with
Great.
him. If worst comes to worst, I have to pick one. I understood Commissioner Martos was okay with Vice Chair Wetton. That's what I heard, just so, okay. So I'll try to sneak both you in, as they say.
Thank you for volunteering. All right. And Mr. Wong, any other things in the engineering division reports?
That is it. Sorry, light. So we can move on to Sergeant Pernas.
Sergeant Perna, please let us know what's going on with the police. I don't think did anyone receive the printout yet of the events or?
The printout, what are you talking about, the accidents for the month?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that should have been included in your packet.
It's the last page of our packet.
Okay, I must have missed it. So, okay, go ahead, please.
Okay, so for the month of June, there was 19 accidents. If you look them over, there was a couple that involved bicycles. I believe 2 of them. Both of them, I believe, were more or less solo bicycle accidents. There was 2 DUI crashes that occurred at the same time. Basically, a vehicle on El Camino struck another vehicle at Rosedale and then again at Oxford. Other than that, I mean, if you've had a chance to look it over, there are some highlighted there in yellow. I believe there's, I think there was 9 injury collisions out of the 19, or possibly 8. Does anyone have any questions about any of the ones listed?
Well, just an observation. I don't know if I'd call it a question, although it looks like we had 2 separate accidents in the Ray Rosedale intersection, right? And it looks like they both resulted in minor injuries. I know historically that's been kind of a problem area for us. It seems like that's still kind of a problem area for us.
I would tend to agree. I mean, that's an area when there are collisions there, they do tend to be, more serious than just a fender bender. But again, keep in mind, one of those was I believe, actually, one of them was a DUI collision, I believe, of the 2 there. But yeah, you're correct. I mean, that ECR and Rosedale, I believe, a lot of them involve vehicles turning left, one in front of the other.
Interestingly, also the same time of day, right? They're both late afternoon. I don't know if sometimes, I mean, this time of year, I don't know. I don't think the sun at that time of day would get in people's eyes, but I don't know, it's just interesting. And again, historically, we've just had a lot of issues at those intersections. I'm not sure there's obvious, I don't know if there's speed enforcement or, because I know that, the intersection zigzags a little bit. I know it's just kind of a challenging place for us.
That actually is an area that is enforced by speed. We do conduct speed enforcement on El Camino from that area, and in that area, both northbound and southbound. It says you do enforce in front of the hospital there, and you do get vehicles going upwards of 50 miles an hour at times. So it is a good location. The speed limit there is 35. You get vehicles going both northbound and southbound when they catch a green light, and it's a place where we do write citations.
Yeah, I mean, look, full disclosure, at some point several years ago, I got pulled over there at one point because the road is very wide, and So you really can go pretty fast and not know you're going fast because the road is so wide. So it's tricky. And then, you know, you come across that pretty challenging intersection. So I guess it's just something, you know, just an area where, you know, we need to retain some focus.
Agreed. Yeah, I'll note that as well. While you guys are looking at the report, I did hear you regarding the comments about masks. I'll forward those comments along to our command staff. I'm sure you're aware there's some enforcement challenges, for the police department in general, not just the Burlingame Police Department, but just law enforcement in general, as to people's rights and maybe county orders sort of having different language than the state orders, and there's just a lot of ins and outs of it. But there are a number of exemptions that people could claim as soon as we go to talk to someone. They could claim a medical issue or something else. And it is kind of funny to me that as soon as you sit down in a restaurant, COVID goes away. You're allowed to take off your mask, and you are now exempt from COVID as long as you're sitting down at a restaurant. So, but if you stand up, you got to put your mask back on. So it's just funny how it all kind of, the different rules and how they're interpreted and stuff. So, but I will forward those comments along to our command staff.
It's probably a difficult time for law enforcement to step in and try to enforce something like that. I mean, me, as a physician, I would love to stand out there and just paintball anybody with big red splotch if they're not wearing a mask. But but I think this, unfortunately, especially at this point, we need to be extra sensitive, and I understand that. It's frustrating.
Believe me, from in speaking with, from my own point of view and other officers, we echo the same sentiment. We're frustrated as well. It's difficult to enforce. I mean, if we had some direction, obviously, or from the county or from city officials that they wanted us to conduct enforcement, they wanted us to ticket people, then we would do that. But I mean, it's difficult, just to provide education to someone, because those could lead to very negative interactions. And it could cause just a lot of other problems in general for the city and for the police department. So, but I do agree that officers should be wearing them. We have standing orders that we're supposed to be wearing them in public. So if officers are not wearing them in public, either make a phone call, call the police department, and let them know. And believe me, the officers will be told to wear their mask, and we'll figure out who it was who wasn't wearing it. Because really the only time they should not be wearing them is in their car when they're alone. So if they're out in public, maybe if they're standing by themselves and they're completely social distanced on a hot day or something, maybe they're just trying to catch their breath or drink a water or coffee or something. But other than that, they should be wearing them. And I think I was once someone had sort of brought that up to my attention when I was in front of Apple or something. I was having a conversation with somebody that wasn't able to understand me with the mask on, so I had removed it, but I was talking to them, and someone else had a problem with that, and they were right. So again, we're supposed to be wearing our mask, and we're wearing them. But anyhow, for what it's worth, I agree with you, and again, I'll forward along your comments.
Thank you very much. All right, we don't have a farmer's market. Does anyone have any communications that they have received from the public this month? I think people have other things on their mind for the most part. Let's move to number 8, committee and subcommittee reports. Downtown parking. Probably nothing new. We just talked about the time frame for the new building, and Burlingame Avenue is being shut down. And then Broadway parking, we didn't meet, and this is again affected by the closing down of Broadway now. School traffic. We talked about trying something new for slow streets. We have to still, we have to get together and talk about that. But we have not.
One item there through the chair is Mr. Wong was going to give me some suggested word length. We're going to try and put something in the e-news bulletin just to encourage drivers to think about how they're driving through the neighborhoods differently in light of the COVID conditions and the increased pedestrians.
Right, and we talked about that it might not be enforceable, but we can still try, and power suggestion, light up boards and things like that could be helpful. Citywide transportation alternatives, I doubt you guys have an update. Okay, I had to ask. That brings us to future agenda items.
Through the chair?
Yes.
We're trying next month to give you guys a good look at the bike ped master plan.
Oh, so cool.
Be something that'll, it won't be short, I will say, but have a lot of input. And then potentially, well, we'll give you more closure updates, right? Because I know folks are really interested in what happens with Broadway, and that'll be within our little 2-week trial. And then we'll hopefully the parklets. I don't have a start date for the parklets, other than right now the staff is going out there and meeting with passing out and just trying to inform the businesses. And once we get those in, the Courtyard will try to start putting out the barriers, which we don't. We're renting them; they're getting delivered. So I'll try to give you the update on that. Hopefully it's in and we can have some input. And as Mr. Sanfilippo said, there was the survey. Hopefully we'll get the survey and get you some of that information regarding the questions you had asked today.
Great. I think we will, have a lot of items that we're going to be like coming back to, and maybe even if it's informational, I think that's a pretty full agenda for next time then with a master plan as well. All right. I think that brings us to the end of the meeting.
All right.
One thing I could, before we,
sure.
if possible, to get a little bit advance of the bike ped plan, because it's going to be pretty extensive. So if we can get it even a few days earlier than normal, that would be great. So we can kind of go through it a little bit.
I'll talk to Mr. Sai, and we'll make note of that. See if we can get something earlier. And some of it may not be documented, because obviously for the next community meeting, it's going to be tough to have we probably won't have a community meeting. So I know Alta's looking at ways to have it online, so you can work through the presentation online and go through that, and it be not just a bunch of slides, but be a little more interactive to be able to help you. And I haven't seen it yet, but supposedly it's been pretty successful that they've used. So
okay,
get you that link sooner, we'll get you that.
Great, appreciate it. Thank you.
Great suggestion.
Through the chair,
yes.
One go back, Mr. Wong, what's the status of the Lion Home project? What's the next step?
I believe, and Miss Mai is on the line, so she can jump in. She'll give you the latest on that.
Aha.
You're muted.
I think Miss Mai, you're muted.
Yep, there we go. Thank you. The project is on schedule for going out for advertisement and bid in August and start construction sometime in September. So that's for phase 1 of the Lion Hog traffic calming improvements, which includes high visibility crosswalks, trial circles, median circles, as well as bike lanes on Howard. So I am expecting the first set of design plan review from the designer in the next 2 weeks timeframe.
Cool, thank you very much. Any last items? Okay, meeting adjourned. I will see you guys in Zoom. I'm sure it's gonna be a long time till we're back in City Hall, I believe.
Yes.